I'd like to take a moment to thank the Blockchain Academy. The Blockchain Academy is an educational training firm offering blockchain training to the enterprise. The Blockchain Academy offers courses for both management and developers, offering delivery online and in live classrooms. The Blockchain Academy works with enterprise clients to create and deliver innovative training programs globally. They recently announced a new blockchain course targeted towards attorneys. To learn more about the Blockchain Academy, visit them at www.theblockchainacademy.com.
This is the Blockchain 360 podcast. Blockchain 360 is a podcast of interviews and discussions about the current state and direction of blockchain. Thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time listening, then thank you for coming. The Blockchain 360 podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes are found at our website, blockchain360.co. Come back often, and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Blockchain360. All links discussed today are included in the show notes.
Hi, my name is Brian Nielsen, and I am your host here on Blockchain 360, where we talk about everything blockchain. And my guest today is Terry Culver, and Terry is the CEO of the Ethereum Classic, or ETC Labs, and he's also the senior advisor for Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Terry, welcome to Blockchain 360.
Thank you for having me.
I was really actually very surprised to even realize that there was a group of people that was still supporting Ethereum Classic. I almost had this viewpoint that it just existed out there and it was just supporting itself virtually. But so tell me, how it is it that you ended up in this role, and tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. With Ethereum Classic, we're just getting started. And how I got into it was I've always had an interest in technology and the role that technology can have in economic and social development. A lot of my background is in developing countries and trying to work with governments on different development programs that can improve the standard of living. When I originally started reading about cryptocurrency and blockchain, it seemed to me that it had enormous possibilities in parts of the world where you have a lack of infrastructure, you have a lack of trust in centralized authorities, and where you have a lack of access to the financial system. Over time, as I learned more, I started to build my network within that community. And about 6 months ago, some very good friends of mine asked me if I would join them in helping to build up ETC Labs.
Interesting. So you have now been with them for 2 months, essentially,
yes.
Or almost 2 months. Okay. So for the for our listening audience, could you actually give us the origin story of why we have two cryptocurrencies that have Ethereum in terms of their front-end name?
Well, the story is a well-known one and contentious for some. So at some point, not too long ago, there was a major hack, and someone made off with a large amount of Ethereum. And the community,
54 million.
Yeah. And the community was really in crisis, trying to figure out how to respond. And a number of members of the community felt that, the people who lost needed to be made whole, that there needed to be some kind of redress in order to maintain trust within that community. There was another group that felt that this was somewhat antithetical to the original philosophy of blockchain. And as a result, you had a fork between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic.
So this actually deals with a venture capital firm that was called the DAO. And what's of interest to me is that this was all due to a poorly written smart contract. So you're telling me that the two camps actually decided, because of the size of the loss, that they needed to make that group whole again. And the way they did it is basically backstep it to a point where they could actually get that done?
I'm not sure it was a result of the size of the loss. I think it was actually, on a fundamental level, a much more philosophical debate about governance. How do you properly govern a truly decentralized system? And I think one camp felt that in order to manage it properly and ensure equity, there needed to be slightly more centralized governance, so that in cases like this, there was a way to respond and help people feel that they had some recourse if something went wrong.
Right.
There's another camp that felt that, well, no, if we're really truly building a permissionless distributed network, we need to stick to that principle. We can't centralize authority in any way.
The code is law.
Yeah, and that the technical deficiency that was exploited shouldn't govern or determine how the network is governed.
So that then leads me to this question. I read recently that there are 54,000 smart contracts with fatal flaws currently on the Ethereum blockchain. So what do you do with those fatal flaws?
That's a good question. Bless you. That's a very good question. I think you do two things. One, you try to identify those flaws and prepare for them. And the second thing is fix the code.
Fix the code.
Fix the code. This is...
Is this the platform code, or is this the smart contract code?
It's the smart contract code.
Okay. All right. So that's at least a great background in terms of this, in terms of how Classic actually came to be. So when that fork happened, what happened to the development teams between now what we are calling Ethereum now? They just kept the name. And then the Ethereum Classic group. Did that also split up, or did this second development team actually arise to support the Classic viewpoint?
There was a split. So a number of developers who had been working on Ethereum moved over to Ethereum Classic. And since then, new developers have come into both. There's a range of opinion about it, so not everyone, I think, was as passionate about the split as others. So you have some people who work on both, and you have some people who only work on one.
So what's the difference between the two platforms?
In a practical sense, at the moment, not much.
So they're similar in terms of transaction capabilities, similar in terms of smart contract capabilities, similar in terms of governance?
They're not similar in terms of governance, so that's one key difference, where Ethereum Classic has tried to stick to a truly, permissionless network.
Right.
And they're not similar in terms of degree. So there's been a lot more development on the Ethereum network, so you have a lot more dApps, you have a lot more functionality. It's just that ecosystem it's been around longer and it's really flourished. I think the ETC ecosystem is in a much earlier stage of development, so it's not as robust.
Well, how is that then any different from any other derivative platform from Ethereum? So Quorum or Neo, they're essentially duplicate copies of that, just being modified by different development teams.
Well, I think over time you'll see more divergence.
So what you're saying, though, at least at this point, is that they are still very similar.
They are. I think the difference in governance will play out more dramatically over time.
So you're mentioning that there is a difference in governance. So what are those differences?
I think whereas Ethereum has chosen to revise its governance to have a slightly more centralized model, Ethereum Classic has chosen to remain truly decentralized.
Okay. Now, the idea of smart contracts, you're using a different scripting language, or are you using the same scripting language?
It's different people modify it, but fundamentally it's the same.
It's the same. So if a developer was thinking, and again, I should know better, but I didn't know better, realizing that, why couldn't you actually deploy on the Ethereum Classic network? if you're going to be deploying on an Ethereum one, why not do it there? Because you have all the advantages of already an existing network, a development team that is managing the course code. So how many people are actually using your platform?
Honestly, I don't know. In terms of the number of developers, I wouldn't know that off the top of my head.
Well, here's the then question.
Yeah.
So let's talk about mining and your community. We'll break it down first by mining. There's a lot of good things that are happening with the Classic network. And so how is the mining capabilities of that network compared to, say, the Ethereum network?
I think it's significantly smaller. It's a more recent development. It's, again, in a very early stage of growth.
At what point do you think that, so you're almost describing it as it's still in a beta phase?
I think of it as nascent.
Okay. So at what point do you think that it'll become sufficiently mature that you're actually going to have then institutions saying, you know what, this is the platform I should be working with?
I think that's a probably 3 to 5 year trajectory. It really comes about from investments in the ecosystem.
Right.
And that's why we've established the lab. You can't, force developers to work on things they're not interested in.
You could, if you controlled the world.
Well, even then I'm not so sure. I think you need to create a certain kind of critical mass, and you need to create a reason that people want to work on that platform.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do with the lab is help create that reason.
Now, is the lab centrally located, or is it a distributed organization?
No, it's centrally located. We have 2 floors in downtown San Francisco.
Okay.
We will be welcoming our first group of projects next week.
Now, is this like an incubator? Is that how it's working?
Yeah. So we'll bring in between 20 and 25 projects a year, probably in 2 cohorts.
Sure. So about 10 each, 10 to 12 each.
Yeah. We'll provide office space. We'll provide technical support, business development support, guidance, training, programs, as well as investment.
So what kind of investments are you making? Generally, an incubator has a nominal investment when you actually join. There's like a demo day that happens, and then you get a larger investment. I mean, so what are the numbers that we're talking about? And while you're thinking about this, if you already have your first cohort coming online, how would, say, another group of people say, I want to be a part of the next one? How would they even apply?
You can apply online or just get in touch with us.
Yeah, what's the website that they can go to? What's the URL?
So etclabs.org.
Okay, etclabs.org. All right.
And we'll have the next round of startups come in January, so we're looking at applications now.
Okay, and how long is the incubation?
It's about 10 weeks.
Okay.
In residence, and there's some flexibility in that depending on what people need.
Right.
In terms of check size, we'll invest somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 depending on the project and depending on certain milestones.
Okay. Are you also working on an accelerator, that second phase type thing, in conjunction? So you're going to have these firms go through your incubation, and of course the success rate depends on whatever it is, but you're going to have some of those rising stars that will actually need, say, a second round. Are you also going to be trying to manage that from your community and venture capital backing?
Eventually, though we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Okay.
One step at a time.
So why did you choose San Francisco, say, versus New York, which is where we are?
We felt that both would have been a good choice.
That's a safe answer.
Both are good choices. I think we felt that, at least in the beginning, we needed to have a presence in the tech world, and that means the Bay Area.
Right. I would like to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, the Blockchain Academy. The Blockchain Academy is an educational training firm offering blockchain training for developers and stakeholders. The Blockchain Academy is currently offering the following live courses: Blockchain Security, Hyperledger Developer Workshop, and Ethereum 0 to D app. Visit the Blockchain Academy's website for course outlines and course dates. The Blockchain Academy's courses can be delivered as a company-specific training, tailor-made to fit your organizational needs, delivered both on-site and online. The Blockchain Academy's training is cost-effective, flexible, and can be conducted in a manner that best suits your organizational needs. To learn more about the Blockchain Academy, visit them at www.theblockchainacademy.com. Tell me then about the community. So you're at the beginning stages. Basically, you were almost abandoned by the larger Ethereum network, and you've had to recreate this community. I'm sure that there are some very, very passionate people that actually either remained with the community or have transferred over to the. So tell me about the community, and what are you doing to actually build that community up?
I think, look, the community is an interesting one. It's a committed one, and it's a growing one. You know.
Now, ETC Labs is also managing the community forums, correct?
Well, so we're managing the community forums in Asia.
Okay.
And then we work very closely with the ETC Foundation. So we're a member of the ETC Foundation board.
Okay. And so the communities that you're doing, I mean, this is actually something we talked before we started recording about the geographic areas that have the highest level of interest. So you've mentioned, of course, the Asia markets. What parts of Asia are seeming to be more interested in the Classic platform, and what are you doing to actually build that out? I mean, does this mean that, as just an extension, does this mean that you're going to be opening up, say, another ETC Labs, say, in Hong Kong or Singapore? Or?
So we have plans to open one in Singapore.
Okay.
I think
nice clean city.
Yeah, so I've heard. I think the largest pockets of interest that we've found are South Korea, Singapore, and China more generally in all things blockchain.
Right. Getting back to the platform itself, are there any security issues that you're dealing with that, as you know, recently it was announced that, of course, that Classic was going to be a part of actually Coinbase, and that happened, I think, on July 12th. Did that actually raise the level of attention that hackers are saying, like, okay, now I'm going to really start attacking this particular platform?
I haven't seen any increase, maybe because there hasn't been a significant increase in price. So if the price of the token goes up, you might see more interest from hackers.
Right.
I think the listing on Coinbase was a really important step. It brought ETC more into the mainstream, and subsequently it's been listed on a host of other exchanges around the world. That's
great. So what has been the daily volume? How has that increased since that listing?
There was an initial spike, and it's since gone down and actually below the price it was when it was first listed. I don't think that's anything to do specifically with Ethereum Classic. I think it's an overall subdued market. Had Ethereum Classic been listed, a year and a half ago, it would probably be a very different story.
Sure. Getting back also to the platform. Now, we know that Ethereum is actually trying to migrate their consensus mechanism. What is happening in the Ethereum Classic space? Are you going to stay where you are? Are you going to migrate also? Or are you going to even adopt something totally new?
But no, we have no plans to migrate. We don't have plans to adopt something new. Our plan really is to help build the ETC ecosystem to make it as vibrant as possible.
Great. So this gets me to then another thing that was a recent announcement. And by the way, congratulations on that Coinbase edition. And this just happened 4 days ago, and that is your U-Trust partnership. So can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, it came out in the paper, so we can talk about it.
We can, although I regret to say we didn't have much to do with that.
You didn't?
No, we will benefit from it, but we weren't directly involved in that.
So how did it happen? I mean, they just decided to come out and support the community?
I'm sure someone had something to do with it, but it wasn't us. I wish I could say it was.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about your development team, or at least the team that's managing the labs. I'm seeing it here on your website that there's a number of people that are a part of it. So James Wu, tell me about James.
So James is an early investor and entrepreneur in cryptocurrencies and blockchain, going back to early 2015. I think he saw early on the promise of the technology and understood very quickly some of the possible commercial opportunities and really sought it out. And he's really been a driving force behind the creation of the lab and understanding the need to build the ecosystem first.
Right. Okay. Any of the other of your management team that you want to talk about?
Well, so Liz, Elizabeth Kuka, who is our director of programs, she, has a background as a teacher and an educator, and also a background in incubators, so brings a lot of that experience into the lab. And she's the one who's really leading the outreach efforts to the projects that we want to bring in. One of our first, and it turns out unfounded concerns, was that we wouldn't find enough projects interested.
Interested in terms of working on the platform?
Yeah, working on the platform and taking up residency in the lab.
When did you first reach out to the community to say, look, we're putting this lab together, if you want to apply? I mean, what was the lead time up to that? Because if you're just about ready to start it, when did you first announce that?
We started in early August. So
very, very quickly.
We're moving very fast. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
We have the space, we have the people. Let's get going.
What's the size of this incubation?
So it's 2 floors.
All right.
And it's about 8,000 square feet.
That's really nice. That's a good size for a startup.
Yeah, very good.
Right. So in this space, you have space for the individual companies. Are you going to have like a public space also a part of that? And is there like meeting rooms and training rooms to be a part of the facility?
Yes, there are meeting rooms. There's a sort of living room type area. There's a kitchen. It's what you would expect in a lab, where people can work on their own, or they can, talk to the other folks in the lab and get to know each other.
Okay, but there's not like then a public component to it. So you have the incubation companies, and then you can have some like a shared desks type facility.
Well, it's an open office plan.
Oh, okay.
And then there's separate meeting rooms, and then there's a living room area and a kitchen.
Okay. So coming back to your development team, you have a set of advisors. You want to tell me a little bit about some of them?
Sure. So Igor, he's leading the ECT dev team, and he's a great partner. He's really responsible for helping to map out the plan for ETC's development over the next couple of years. And he's just been a great help and will be a great help to the projects once they come in the lab.
Okay. Any of the others?
No, I think that's
the primary one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the roadmap. So what is part of the roadmap for Ethereum Classic?
We see the need to build out the infrastructure of Ethereum Classic to make it easier for people to work on that platform.
Sure.
So one project is the Emerald project, which is...
what is the Emerald project?
So the Emerald project is essentially a platform on ETC that will allow developers to work on that platform more easily. At the moment, in order...
So like a software development kit?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so to make it easier for developers to create dApps, to sort of just begin working on that platform, rather than create the framework and then start to develop their project, they can start their project straight away. The second thing we're really promoting is sidechains.
Okay.
Because we think, we want a proliferation of projects, and rather than dealing with the centralized chain and the potential technical limitations of that,
Right.
if a developer can develop a side chain on their project and link it up to Ethereum Classic, that's probably a quicker and easier avenue.
Right. One of the things that is listed here with regards to 2019 is moving on the scalability improvements, and of course you're going to be working with that, managing that from the sidechain initiatives. Does your software development kit, is it going to be covering that type of interoperability between the chains and managing that more appropriately?
Ideally, yeah, because we're promoting ETC, but we don't think it should be isolated. We think that there has to be a way for developers to move between platforms, for dApps to be able to move between platforms if possible.
Sure. Have you tested the ability to have, say, Ethereum dApps ported to the Classic platform?
We have, and I think in principle at this point it's fairly easy, but it all depends on the complexity of the dApp that you've created.
So, what are some of the interesting dApps that you've seen added, or even of more interest of this cohort? Like, what are some of the topics that they're trying to tackle? What are the solutions that they're trying to develop?
I think that there's a range. I think one of the interesting things is it's a great period of experimentation. So, we see things in the data privacy space. We see things in supply chain management. We see things in payments and wallets. In healthcare, it covers a huge range of potential projects. Which one of those?
Well, tell me, share with us one of the ones that have really piqued your personal interest.
I think so. There are two projects that pique my interest a lot. One has to do with payment systems. So basically, being able to convert ETC to fiat and fiat to ETC.
Right.
I think you need that on-ramp and off-ramp in order to really get people using it, in order to make it easy for people, to make it more mainstream. I think that kind of infrastructure is necessary. And then the second is around digitizing, or not digitizing, but helping to tokenize digital assets. So if you look at digital content, it's very hard to, as Netflix will tell you, it's very hard to monetize your content on a subscription basis. They have a huge price risk when they source the content, and they have no variability on price when they sell it.
Right. Well, it's the same thing with MoviePass.
Exactly.
Which is a crazy business model from my perspective.
So I think this is a case where blockchain may be able to make a difference, because you can basically assign value to the particular digital asset. You can grant a license for access to that digital asset for an appropriate fee, and sort of match the fee to the cost.
You've been talking about the digital asset aspect of it. What about non-digital assets, where you're actually providing a digital representation for a physical asset? I mean, is that something that your team and the dev group is actually thinking about?
So do you mean, tokenizing?
Say gold or diamonds or automobiles. I mean, it could be literally anything.
Yeah, I mean, those are interesting. Sometimes it's not clear to me that it's necessary for blockchain. Like, blockchain is a necessary solution for that.
Well, what about like land registries? I mean, the whole idea is that, whenever you read about anything blockchain for Africa, a land registry is a paramount solution that they're in need of, and that is it eliminates then the political or even the loss of just the records of who owns what land, and then that ownership claim, and keeping and maintaining that. So why wouldn't it be, having a non-digital asset being represented on the blockchain be of high value?
Well, so it's definitely of high value. What I mean to say is that I think the technical and political challenges involved are significant. And I don't think the technology is sufficiently developed at the moment to create enough momentum to deal with those political challenges.
Right.
So by all means, in an ideal world, you can quickly see the benefit of blockchain for land title in volatile environments.
Right.
But trying to get the necessary stakeholders together to agree to use that system, to convert to that system, to somehow take your legacy systems and bring it into blockchain, that requires a certain kind of stability and dedication that is oftentimes impossible to achieve in development projects.
Right. When you think of what that roadmap is for Ethereum Classic, are you going to be focusing on the broad operational aspect of the platform, or are you going to actually be saying to ourselves or to yourselves, maybe we should try to attack this from a sector perspective? Let's go out and say, you know what, we're going to actually tune the platform to actually serve this particular sector. And the one that comes, of course, to easily to my mind is the supply chain. Having the ability to say, you know what, everybody's going to have to be doing this. This is a massive, massive market because irrespective of the industry, whether it's pharmaceuticals or lettuce or airplane parts, is that a concept that you're focusing on? I mean, because I've spoken to other blockchain companies, and one of the things that I've gotten back from them is their attention to particular industries. They're basically saying, you know what, let me carve this out. I mean, if you look at Corda or Ripple, I mean, they're actually saying the financial sector is really where we're wanting to be. I mean, is Ethereum Classic trying to say that same thing, or you're really trying to be just that broad open platform?
I think that kind of sector specificity is a phase 2 project. At this point, we're trying to be as open as possible. We're trying to get as many people developing on it as possible.
Well, the network effect of it.
Yeah. And I think over time, there may be opportunities that emerge in certain sectors that we recognize and then promote. But at this point, I think it's too early.
So getting back to your original story about yourself, that background story about how you've found yourself more and more interested, and now you've taken on this role. This is a huge pivot in your life. You're going from an academic environment to literally a technology environment that, I mean, do you find that there's similarities between those two? And what was the impetus for you to actually say, you know what, I'm going to give up this old part of my life and recreate myself in this new area, simply because that's where I think, and again, I'm just putting words in your mouth, that's where I think the future is?
So I don't see it as big a pivot as maybe it looks on paper.
Well, it looks on paper like a big pivot.
I've always been interested in being in places where I can help build something. And I think at this point in time, this is a place where I can help build something.
Okay.
In terms of the differences, yes, there are significant cultural differences between a university or between my previous experience as a policy advisor to running an incubator.
Right.
But there are definitely similarities too. I think there's an interest in knowledge. There's a commitment to growth. There's a fundamental motivation for change. These are all good things.
Okay. Any last words that you want to share with our listeners about what you think that and why they should be giving more and more consideration to the Ethereum Classic platform as a true development platform, and one that they should be giving serious consideration to in terms of building dApps and using it for smart contracts?
Well, I'll go back to the metaphor you used earlier that You know, Bitcoin is one tree in the forest. There are lots of trees, and some are growing, and this one is growing. And I think we're only at the very beginning of understanding the ways in which this technology can be developed and deployed. I think if you look at the history of technological development, the most effective and widespread uses are often the ones that are the least expected.
Right.
And so, you know, our commitment to experimentation and our commitment to fostering that ecosystem will hopefully lead to the emergence of those surprises.
Right. I've actually argued many times that I even hate the analogy, but I do have my own spin on that. And the analogy is that the blockchain world is really like 1994 internet world. Mm-hmm. The reason why I hate the analogy is it's generally speaking about the technological advances of it. And I think that blockchain is a much superior and much further mature technology and has greater capabilities than what the internet originally fostered. But the way I like that analogy is that we're at the point where our imaginations are only starting to think of how to utilize these types of technologies, and that our imagination in 1994 of how to use the internet was very, very limited. And now our imagination has bloomed into this entire ecosystem of everything, all the internet companies and Internet of Things and all new technologies. And so for me, the way I've always described it is that that our ideas, or the ideas that will be most impactful from blockchain, have yet to be imagined. Mm-hmm. Or they're just seeds that have just basically started to be planted and to develop into something that might prove to be of value or not, but we don't know.
That's true. To build on that comment, I think we often think of technological change as driven by technical innovation,
right? And
it obviously is. But
well, that's a part of it, right?
Yeah, but the social application or the social need is the other part of it. And to my mind, the social needs is what will drive the dispersion or adoption of blockchain technology or certain aspects of that technology.
Right. All right. Well, I want to thank you for being my guest here on Blockchain 360. And for those of you who are listening, we'll put some of the connection, some of the URLs that we mentioned into the show notes. And so you can actually go to the ethereumclassic.org website, as well as to their Ethereum Labs, which is etclabs.org website. And of course, I'll put your Twitter so they can actually follow you too.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for a good conversation.
Thank you very much.
The Blockchain 360 podcast is produced weekly. Have a question? Want us to interview someone specific? Wish to hear about a particular topic? Let us know. You can email podcast@blockchain360.co or tweet us on Twitter @blockchain360 or at our website blockchain360.co.